The room was already full when I arrived. That kind of full where the noise hits you before the door even closes behind you. Laughter bouncing off walls, glasses clinking, people talking over each other like every sentence had to fight to exist. New Year's Eve always does that to families. I stood in the entryway for a moment, holding the small bottle of wine I brought, watching them. They were all there. My aunt's house looked exactly like it always did. Warm, slightly chaotic, lived in a way that made you feel like time didn't matter here. The same old furniture, the same framed photos from decades ago, the same Christmas lights still hanging even though the calendar had already moved on. Nobody ever really rushed anything in this house, except conversation. I stepped inside, and just like that, I became part of the background. It wasn't intentional. That's the strange part about being invisible in a room full of people who know your name. They don't ignore you on purpose, they just don't adjust for you. Conversations continue as if you're an optional detail. "Hey, Fred," someone said without looking up. I nodded, smiled, moved on. That was my role in most rooms. Not the center, not even the edge. Somewhere slightly outside the frame where you're technically present but never really part of the picture. My family calls me Fred Tucker. 51 years old, single, no kids, no dramatic failures either, just a life that never seemed to demand attention from anyone else. And that was fine. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. Because I learned something a long time ago that most people never figure out. When you stop needing to be seen, people stop looking. And when people stop looking, you can build anything you want right in front of them. They just won't notice. I saw Aunt Beverly first. She was in the kitchen, moving between counters like she was conducting an orchestra no one else could hear. Same energy as always. Warm, loud, slightly chaotic, but somehow holding everything together without trying. "Fred," she called out the moment she saw me. "You're here. Come here. Look at you. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Auntie." "You look thin." "I always look the same." "You look thin," she repeated, already pressing a plate into my hands before I could argue. That was Beverly. Conversation was optional. Feeding you was mandatory. I smiled anyway. Then I heard him. Jay. Before I even saw him, I knew he was in the room. My brother has a presence that announces itself in advance, like the room adjusts its volume to make space for him. Laughter got louder near the living room. A story being told. People reacting just a little too quickly. That was Jay's effect. Not forced, just natural authority. He was 6 years younger than me, but somehow had always carried himself like he was older in all the ways that mattered. Confident, loud, certain. The kind of man who never seemed to question whether people were listening. I walked closer, and there he was. Standing near the fireplace, glass in hand, mid-story, already holding the room like it belonged to him. His wife Donna laughed at something he said a second too early, like she knew her cue. My cousin Derek nodded along like every sentence Jay spoke was part of something important. And then Jay saw me. His face lit up immediately. "Fred!" he called out, loud enough for half the room to hear. There it was. Not Fred. Freddie. He only used that name in public. I had asked him not to years ago. He never stopped. He walked over and grabbed my shoulder. Firm, familiar. Slightly too firm to be casual. "Man, I wasn't sure you'd make it," he said, grinning. "Thought maybe you'd be home doing, I don't know, whatever you do on nights like this." A few people chuckled. Not loudly, just enough. I held his gaze. "Same thing I'm doing now," I said. His grin widened like he'd won something. That's how Jay was. Everything became a moment he could own. And I didn't fight it. I never really did. Because in families like ours, You learn early which battles aren't worth the noise. So I just stood there, smiled, and let the room forget about me again. The room started to change around 11:50. It wasn't obvious at first. Nothing ever is right before something uncomfortable happens in a family gathering. It begins in small shifts, people standing a little straighter, conversations slowing down, glasses getting refilled just a bit too deliberately. Someone turned up the TV. The countdown had started. 10, 9, 8. Everyone slowly gathered toward the center of the living room, forming that loose circle people pretend is natural but always feels slightly staged. Glasses in hand, smiles rehearsed. The familiar New Year performance. Aunt Beverly stood near the front holding her glass like she always does, like she's holding the entire family together in her hands without saying it out loud. "Another year," she said warmly. "Another chance. I'm grateful we're all here." There was a soft cheers around the room. I raised my glass slightly. Not because I was excited, just because that's what you do. 7, 6, 5. And then I felt it. That subtle shift. Jay stepping half a step forward. Not obvious, not aggressive yet, just enough to make the room unconsciously give him space. That's how he always moved, like attention was something the room owed him before he even spoke. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! The room exploded into noise. Glass clinking, laughter, hugs, people turning toward each other like they'd been waiting all year just to touch shoulders again. And right when the noise should have faded, Jay cleared his throat. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The room heard him anyway. "I just want to say something real quick." That phrase, real quick. I already knew what kind of moment this was going to become. People always think the dangerous moments in families are loud. They're not. They're polite. Everyone slowly turned toward him. Even Beverly paused mid-smile. Jay lifted his glass slightly, stepping forward just enough to become the center of gravity in the room. "It's been a good year," he began casually. "Donna and I finally closed on the house in Lake Oswego. Business is growing, kids are doing great." A few nods around the room. A few nice comments. He paused, just long enough to make sure they were listening. Then his eyes shifted. To me. Not quickly. Not accidentally. Deliberately. "And I just think," he continued, smile widening slightly, "some of us are really figuring life out." A small laugh from Derek. Donna smiled into her glass like she'd heard the line before. Jay kept going. "And then there are others." The pause after that was intentional, sharp, controlled. I didn't move. I already knew where this was going, but knowing and stopping it are two different things. "Some of us are 51 years old," he said, voice steady, almost conversational. "No wife, no kids. Still kind of just floating." The room got quieter. Not silent yet, but aware. I felt Beverly glance at me, then away again. Jay tilted his head slightly like he was observing something mildly unfortunate. "I mean," he added, smiling now, "must be tough, right? Spending New Year's like that?" A few nervous laughs, not many. The kind of laughs people make when they want to prove they're still part of the group, even when they know something just turned. Then he lifted his glass higher, like a toast. But it wasn't a toast. It was a sentence. "I guess we all just end up where we're supposed to be," he said. "Right, Fred?" That was the first time he said my name directly into the moment. Not Freddie. Fred. The room followed his gaze, all of them. Suddenly, I wasn't standing in a room anymore. I was standing in a spotlight I didn't ask for. And the silence that followed wasn't immediate. It arrived slowly. Like a door closing in a large house, you suddenly realize you're locked inside. No one spoke. Donna stopped smiling. Derek looked down at his drink like it had answers in it. Aunt Beverly's hand tightened slightly around her glass. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room settling on me. Waiting. For a reaction, for discomfort, for anything that would make this moment complete for them. But I didn't give it. I just looked at Jay. And for the first time that night, I didn't smile back. I didn't frown either. I just held the silence. Because something in me had already stopped reacting and started remembering. The room was still reacting when I stopped reacting. That's the strange thing about moments like this. Everyone else keeps moving emotionally while something inside you quietly steps out of the current. Jay was still smiling, still holding his glass slightly raised like he'd just delivered a harmless joke at a family dinner. But I wasn't inside the room the same way anymore. I was observing it. Not them. The pattern. People don't change suddenly, not really. They reveal themselves slowly, over years, in the same kind of moments, repeated enough times that you eventually stop calling them accidents. Jay had always done this. Control the room, fill the silence, decide the narrative before anyone else had a chance to question it. And I had always let him. Not because I couldn't stop him, but because I didn't see a reason to. Until now. I looked around the room. Aunt Beverly's smile was frozen in that uncomfortable way people smile when they want harmony more than honesty. Donna was pretending to fix something in her glass. Derek had suddenly found the floor very interesting. No one wanted to be the first to break the moment, because once a moment like this breaks, it becomes real. And reality is harder to ignore than jokes. Jay glanced at me again, still expecting something, a reaction, a laugh, a denial. Even anger would have been fine for him, anything that would turn the moment back into something he could manage. But I stayed still. And that's when I felt it. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something quieter, colder, like a switch being turned off somewhere deep inside me. Because humiliation only works when the person receiving it agrees to carry it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't. I remembered something instead. Not a single event, a pattern. The way Jay always spoke before thinking people mattered. The way he always assumed silence meant agreement. The way the room always adjusted itself around him without realizing it was happening. It wasn't power. It was habit. And habits can be dangerous when no one ever interrupts them. I took a slow breath, not because I needed to calm down, but because I was deciding something. Jay tilted his head slightly, still smiling, still waiting. "Fred?" he said again, softer this time, like he was checking if I was still there. I was there, more than I had been all night. I just wasn't responding the same way anymore. Something in me had already stepped back far enough to see the structure of the moment. The room, the roles, the expectation, and most importantly, the assumption that I was finished. I wasn't. I let my eyes move slowly across the room again, each face, each reaction, each carefully controlled silence. And I realized something simple. They weren't watching me. They were watching him, waiting to see if he had gone too far. That was the real dynamic, not me versus Jay. Jay versus consequence. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the consequence. I felt like the witness to it. Jay chuckled lightly, trying to recover the tone. "You all right?" he asked, lifting his glass again like nothing had happened. "I was just joking, man." A joke. That word. It always arrives right after the damage has been done. But I didn't answer, not yet, because something else had already started forming underneath the silence. Not revenge, not anger. Clarity. And clarity always arrives right before change. I set my glass down slowly on the table beside me, carefully, deliberately. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt like it landed in a different part of the room. Everyone noticed it. Even Jay, especially Jay. Because for the first time that night, I wasn't absorbing the room anymore. I was separating from it. And that's when he should have stopped talking. But he didn't know that yet. The house was still in celebration mode when my phone buzzed. Not loudly, just once. That soft vibration that cuts through noise in a way louder things never can. I didn't look at it immediately. I already knew who it was. Jay. Because people like Jay don't wait long after moments like that. Silence makes them uncomfortable. They always try to reset the room before the room fully settles into what just happened. I waited 3 rings. Not because I was busy. Because I needed those seconds to stop seeing him as my brother in a noisy living room and start seeing him as what he actually was in that moment. A man who didn't know what he had just stepped into. I answered. "Fred!" His voice came through fast. Too fast. That forced confidence he uses when he's trying to recover control. "Yeah." A pause, longer than he expected. He started, then stopped. I could hear movement in the background, pacing. He always paces when he's losing mental ground. "Look, about earlier, at the toast, Jay." I said his name once, not loud, just enough to interrupt the momentum. He stopped. That's the thing about Jay. He can dominate a room, but not a pause. "What's going on?" I asked. Another breath. Then it came out. "The Terran contract fell through." There it was. Not the joke, not the laughter, the real reason he was calling. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the noise from the house fade into the background. "Completely?" I asked. "Completely," he said. "No warning, no explanation, just gone." I stayed quiet, let him fill the silence. He did. "I've got vendors waiting, payroll coming up. I don't have time to fix this, Fred. I need—" He stopped, recalibrated. "I need help." That word, help. Jay didn't use it often, not like that, not stripped of pride. I looked out toward the window where the city lights blurred slightly in the winter air. "How bad is it?" I asked. He gave me a number, a real one, not exaggerated, not softened, just raw exposure. And I didn't react. Not because I didn't care, but because I already knew. I had known for longer than he thought. The silence between us stretched. "Fred?" he said again, smaller now, less controlled. "You still there?" "I'm here." Another pause. "I wouldn't call you if I had another option," he added quickly. "You know that." I closed my eyes briefly. That was true. And that was the problem. "Come to my office tomorrow," I said. He hesitated. "Your office?" Something shifted in his voice, confusion, recalibration again. "Yeah," I said. 9 a.m. "Okay," he said slowly. "Fred, thanks. I mean it." I ended the call without adding anything else. And for a moment, I just sat there. Still, because something had already changed, not outside, inside. Jay thought he was calling his brother. What he didn't know was that he was walking straight into a structure he had never seen before, a system he had been benefiting from, without ever realizing who was holding it together. I stood up slowly and walked toward the window. Below me, the city was still alive with New Year energy, lights, movement, noise, but it all felt distant now, like I was watching it from somewhere slightly removed, not above it, just outside of it. My phone buzzed again, a text from Jay. "Thanks again. I owe you." I looked at it for a moment, then turned the phone face down. Because that was the first mistake he still didn't understand. He thought this was about debt, but it wasn't. It was about understanding. And tomorrow, he was going to understand everything. The lobby of my building was quiet that morning. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels expensive. I was already in my office when I got the call from reception. "Mr. Tucker, your brother is here." I didn't answer immediately, not because I wasn't ready, but because I was. "Send him up," I said, and then I stood up. Not in a rush, not with anticipation, just deliberately. Because this wasn't a meeting. It was a moment that had been 19 years in the making. When the elevator doors opened, I didn't see Jay right away. I heard him first. The small shift in footsteps, the pause, then the silence that followed when he realized where he was. I walked out into the hallway and saw him standing there, frozen. For the first time all night, he wasn't talking. His eyes moved slowly across the space. Glass walls, open floor, the city stretching out behind it like it belonged to the building. And then he looked at the name on the wall, Tucker and Associates Property Group. His last name, but not his world. "Fred," he said finally. But it didn't sound like my name anymore. It sounded like a question. I didn't respond. I just walked past him. "Come on," I said. My voice was calm, not cold, just final. I led him down the hallway into the boardroom, and when he stepped inside, he stopped completely. Because she was already there. Harriet, sitting at the head of the table like she had always belonged there. Calm, composed, waiting. The air in the room changed immediately. I watched it happen in real time. Jay didn't speak, didn't move, just stared, like his brain was trying to match two images that refused to align. Harriet looked up, smiled. Not surprised, not emotional, just steady. "Hello, Jay," she said softly. That was all it took. His face shifted instantly, confusion first, then recognition, then something heavier. Something that looked like it had been buried for a long time and suddenly resurfaced all at once. "No," he said quietly. "No, this can't." I pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed a folder on the table. Slowly, deliberately. Inside were photographs, not just one, several. Harriet and me. Our wedding, our life, the kids, the years Jay had never asked about because he never thought there was anything to ask. I slid the first photo across the table. He didn't pick it up. He just looked at it. And I watched the exact moment it hit him. The realization wasn't loud, it didn't explode, it collapsed inward, like something inside him finally losing structure. "You're married?" he said. I nodded. 20 years, I replied. The silence that followed wasn't like the one at New Year's Eve. That one had been social. This one was personal. Heavy. Unavoidable. Harriet finally spoke again. "You were there the day I left the parking lot," she said calmly. "You said I wasn't the kind of woman your brother should be with." Jay closed his eyes briefly, like he wanted to disappear from the sentence. "I didn't know," he muttered. I leaned back slightly. "That's the point," I said. He looked at me then, really looked. Not like a brother, not like a competitor, but like a man recalculating every assumption he had ever made. Harriet closed the folder gently, not angrily, just finished. "I've built a very good life, Jay," she said. "A peaceful one." She glanced at me. "And your brother helped me do that." That sentence landed differently, because it wasn't an accusation, it was confirmation. Jay swallowed hard. His voice came out smaller than I had ever heard it. "Fred, why didn't you ever say anything?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple, and simplicity is harder to accept than explanation. Finally, I said, "Because you never asked about anything that didn't look like you." The room went still again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was understanding beginning to form, slowly, painfully, and completely. The rain had stopped by the time Jay left the building, not dramatically, just quietly, like the city itself had decided the conversation was over. He stood in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary, looking at everything the way people look at places that suddenly feel unfamiliar. The glass walls, the skyline, the name on the door he had never associated with anything other than family dinners and jokes. Now it meant something else. He turned back toward me one last time. There was no anger left in his face, no sarcasm, no confidence, just something quieter. He nodded once, slowly, like he was trying to acknowledge a version of reality he had never prepared for. "I didn't know," he said again. This time, it wasn't an excuse. It was surrender. I leaned against the doorway, hands in my pockets. "I know," I said, and I meant it, because that was never the issue. The issue was everything he assumed without knowing. He exhaled sharply through his nose, almost like a laugh that didn't make it all the way out. "You had all of this the whole time." I didn't answer immediately because people always misunderstand what having something means. Finally, I said, "No." A pause. "I built it." That was the difference. He looked down at the floor for a second, then back up at me, and for the first time since we were kids, he didn't have anything clever to say. "Where do I go from here?" he asked quietly. Not the confident Jay from New Year's Eve, not the man who owned rooms, just a man standing in a hallway, recalculating his entire identity. I walked past him slightly and pressed the elevator button. Then I turned back. "I'm going to help you," I said. He blinked. "What?" "You're still my brother," I added. "That doesn't change because you finally saw something clearly." The elevator doors opened behind him. He didn't move right away, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to leave the moment yet. "I don't deserve that," he said quietly. I gave a small shrug. "Probably not," I said. "But that's not the point." That made him look at me again, really look, not through assumptions, not through comparisons, just directly, for once. I stepped aside. "Tom Greer will handle your bridge financing," I continued. "My guy Kevin will fix your operations. You'll hate it at first. Then you'll understand why it matters." He nodded slowly, still absorbing, still processing, still losing old versions of himself, one layer at a time. Before stepping into the elevator, he hesitated again, then said something I didn't expect. "For what it's worth, His voice cracked slightly at the edges. I'm proud of you. I didn't react immediately, not because it didn't matter, but because it did. A long silence passed between us. Then I nodded once. Drive safe, Jay. He stepped into the elevator. The doors started closing, and for a split second, just before they sealed shut, I saw him the way I had never seen him before. Not loud, not certain, not the center of anything. Just human. Then the doors closed, and he was gone. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, not because I was emotional, but because nothing needed to be done anymore. The noise was over. The misunderstanding had ended itself. I turned and walked back into my office. My phone was already on my desk, a text from Harriet. How'd it go? I looked out the window. The city below was bright again, not because it had changed, but because the storm had passed. I typed, he finally understands. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then, did it feel good? I paused. Not long, just enough to be honest with myself. Then I replied, it felt like peace. I set the phone down. Russell had practice later. Nora would want help with her science project. Davis would argue about tacos again like it was a negotiation. Life continued. Not louder, not bigger, just steady. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Because real power isn't what people see. It's what you no longer need to explain.